The crack of gunfire echoed through the canyons, sending a flock of startled birds into the clear Arizona sky as Naomi Keller ducked low in the driver's seat of her wagon. The wheel had given way with a sickening crack just moments before, tilting the entire wagon at a dangerous angle and spilling her carefully packed supplies across the dusty trail. The timing couldn't have been worse. She'd been warned about the Blackwater Gang roaming these parts, and now the distinct sound of hoofbeats pounded behind her, growing louder with each passing second. Arizona Territory, 1883. The unforgiving landscape of scrubby brush and red rock stretched for miles in every direction from the trail that wound its way toward Springerville. Naomi had left her former life in Philadelphia behind 3 months ago after her husband's death, determined to start fresh as the new schoolteacher in town. Now, with outlaws on her trail and a broken wagon wheel, her dreams seemed to be crumbling as quickly as the dry earth beneath her feet. "Whoa!" she commanded the panicked horses, jumping down from the driver's bench to assess the damage. The left rear wheel had split clean through, the wooden spokes splintered beyond any quick repair she could manage. Naomi glanced frantically over her shoulder. The dust cloud kicked up by approaching riders grew larger on the horizon. Maybe 10 minutes, she guessed. Not enough time to hide, not enough time to run. Another gunshot rang out, closer this time, a warning perhaps, or just the outlaws entertaining themselves with the thought of fresh prey. Naomi reached for the small derringer hidden in her skirt pocket. 6 bullets against what sounded like half a dozen men. The odds weren't in her favor. "Madam, you've got yourself a problem there." The voice came from behind a nearby outcropping of rocks. Naomi spun, raising her small pistol with trembling hands as a tall man emerged, leading a chestnut stallion by the reins. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out sharp, watchful eyes assessing both her and the approaching dust cloud with equal intensity. "Who are you?" she demanded, keeping her gun trained on him. "Owen Montgomery," he replied calmly, tipping his hat. "And unless you want to make acquaintance with the Blackwater Gang in about 5 minutes, I suggest you let me take a look at that wheel." Naomi hesitated, her gaze darting between the stranger and the approaching riders. "How do I know you're not with them?" A grim smile crossed his face. "Because if I was, I wouldn't be warning you about them now, would I?" He moved toward the wagon without waiting for her permission, dropping to one knee to examine the broken wheel. "This is bad, but not impossible. I can jury-rig something that'll get you moving, but we need to work fast." Another gunshot, another cloud of dust rising from the direction of the approaching riders. "Fine," Naomi decided, lowering her pistol. "What do you need me to do?" "Keep watch," Owen instructed, already removing his leather jacket and rolling up his shirt sleeves. "And hand me that toolbox under your seat." Naomi retrieved the small wooden box her late husband had insisted she bring along. "I'm Naomi Keller," she said, passing him the tools. "Pleasure," Owen grunted, already focused on the task at hand. "Though I wish the circumstances were different." His hands moved with practiced efficiency, extracting broken pieces of wood and assessing what could be salvaged. "You're a long way from anywhere, Mrs. Keller." "Miss," she corrected automatically. "My husband passed. I'm heading to Springerville to take up a teaching position." Owen glanced up momentarily, genuine surprise registering in his expression before he returned to his work. "Springerville could use some civilization," he murmured, extracting several items from his own saddlebag's rope, metal fixtures she didn't recognize and a small hammer. "They're getting closer. Count them for me." Naomi squinted at the horizon, trying to steady her breathing. 5 riders, maybe 6, moving fast. "As I figured," Owen nodded, working steadily. His hands were weathered but precise as he began an improvised repair, cutting pieces of wood from a spare plank he'd found among her supplies. The Blackwaters don't travel in small numbers. Cowards, the lot of them. You seem to know them well, Naomi observed, her voice tight with apprehension. Too well, he replied cryptically. Now, hand me that rope and stand back. For the next few minutes they worked in tense silence. Owen crafted a makeshift repair to the broken wheel that somehow seemed both impossibly fragile and remarkably sturdy. He used rope to bind salvaged spokes, metal bracing from his own supplies, and ingenuity born of desperation. All the while, Naomi kept watch, updating him on the approaching riders who were now close enough that she could make out individual figures against the desert backdrop. "That'll have to do," Owen announced, wiping sweat from his brow. "It won't last forever, but it should get you to Springerville if you don't push the horses too hard." "Thank you," Naomi said, genuinely moved by this stranger's help. "But what about you? They're almost upon us." Owen grinned, a flash of white teeth beneath his dust-covered face. "Don't worry about me, Miss Keller. I've been avoiding the Blackwaters for years." He whistled sharply and his horse trotted over. "Get up in that wagon and be ready to move. I'll buy you some time." "I can't just leave you. You can and you will," he cut her off firmly, checking the ammunition in his revolver. "A schoolteacher's more valuable to Springerville than another gunslinger. Besides," he added with a wink that softened his words, "I've got some unfinished business with these fellas." Before Naomi could protest further, Owen swung up onto his horse with fluid grace. "Head straight for town. Don't stop for anything. That repair should hold, but don't test it more than necessary. Will I see you again?" The question escaped her lips before she could consider how forward it sounded. Owen touched the brim of his hat, his eyes holding hers for a long moment. "Count on it, Miss Keller. I've got business in Springerville too." With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode directly toward the oncoming outlaws, drawing their attention away from the wagon. Naomi climbed back onto the driver's bench, gathering the reins with trembling hands. Behind her, she heard Owen fire 3 shots in rapid succession, drawing the outlaws toward him instead of her. She snapped the reins and the horses lurched forward, the repaired wheel creaking but holding as the wagon pulled away. As she crested a small rise, Naomi glanced back to see Owen Montgomery leading the outlaws on a wild chase in the opposite direction, his chestnut stallion kicking up clouds of dust as they disappeared into a narrow canyon. His bravery both terrified and fascinated her, a perfect stranger risking his life for hers without hesitation. The road to Springerville stretched before her, and for the first time since her husband's death, Naomi felt something other than grief or fear. She felt hope and an unexpected curiosity about the man who had just saved her life. 3 days later, Naomi stood before 28 eager faces in Springerville's newly constructed schoolhouse. The children ranged from 6 to 16 years old, some dressed in well-maintained clothes that spoke of relative prosperity, others in patched garments that revealed the hardscrabble existence of frontier life. All of them regarded her with identical expressions of curiosity and mild suspicion. "Good morning," she began, smoothing her skirts nervously. "My name is Miss Keller, and I'll be your teacher. I've come all the way from Philadelphia to be here with you." A small boy in the front row raised his hand immediately. "Miss Keller, is it true you was almost killed by the Blackwater Gang on your way here?" Naomi blinked in surprise. News traveled quickly in small towns. "I had some trouble on the road," she acknowledged carefully, "but a kind stranger helped me repair my wagon." "That was Owen Montgomery," announced an older girl with long braids, not bothering to raise her hand. My pa says he used to be a Texas Ranger before he turned bounty hunter. A murmur of excitement rippled through the classroom at this revelation. Naomi felt her cheeks warm slightly at the mention of Owen's name. In the 3 days since her arrival, she'd heard nothing from the man who had saved her life, though she'd made discreet inquiries around town. "That's quite enough gossip," Naomi said firmly, though her mind was spinning with this new information. A bounty hunter. That explained his familiarity with the outlaws. "We're here to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, not to discuss the comings and goings of adults." She turned to the blackboard and began writing out the day's lessons, but her thoughts remained with Owen Montgomery. Had he survived his encounter with the Blackwater Gang? Had he merely been passing through, his promise to see her again nothing but empty words meant to reassure her in a moment of crisis? The school day passed quickly, with Naomi assessing the various levels of education among her students. Some could barely write their names, while others displayed remarkable aptitude for mathematics or literature. By the time she dismissed them in the afternoon, she had a clearer picture of the challenge before her and a growing attachment to these children of the frontier. As the last student filed out, Naomi began erasing the blackboard, clouds of chalk dust catching the late afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. The sound of boot heels on the wooden floor behind her made her turn, expecting to see one of the parents. Instead, Owen Montgomery stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking considerably cleaner than when she'd last seen him. His dark hair was neatly combed, his clothing freshly laundered, though she noticed a new bandage wrapped around his left forearm. "Miss Keller," he greeted her with a small nod. "I see you made it to town safely." Naomi set down the eraser, momentarily speechless. He looked different in the soft light of the schoolhouse, younger perhaps, or simply less dangerous. The sharp vigilance in his eyes remained, however, constantly scanning his surroundings with practiced awareness. "Mr. Montgomery," she finally responded, finding her voice. "I wasn't sure I'd see you again." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I told you I had business in Springerville." "The children tell me you're a bounty hunter," she said, unable to keep the question from her tone. Owen stepped further into the room, examining the educational charts she'd hung on the walls with apparent interest. "The children have active imaginations," he replied, though his evasiveness confirmed rather than denied their claims. "And the Blackwater Gang." She pressed, moving around her desk to stand before him. "What happened after I left? They decided the chase wasn't worth the trouble," he said simply, though the bandage on his arm suggested a different story. His eyes met hers directly. "I didn't come here to talk about outlaws, Miss Keller." "Why did you come then?" "To make sure you were settling in," he replied, his tone softening slightly. "Springerville can be unwelcoming to newcomers." Naomi considered his words. The town had been cordial enough, though somewhat reserved in their welcome. The schoolhouse had been prepared for her arrival, and the boarding house where she'd taken a room was comfortable if plain. But she'd sensed the wariness beneath the surface politeness, the natural suspicion of frontier communities toward outsiders. "The people seem nice enough," she offered diplomatically. Owen laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his features. "You're being kind. This town has more secrets than the desert has cacti." He glanced around the empty classroom again. "How are the children treating you?" "They're eager to learn," Naomi answered honestly, "though they seem more interested in your exploits than in their lessons." "I'll try not to provide them with any more material," he promised with another smile. He shifted his weight, suddenly appearing uncomfortable. "I should let you finish your work, Mr. Montgomery," Naomi called as he turned to leave. "I never properly thanked you for what you did on the trail. You saved my life." Owen paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "No thanks necessary, Miss Keller. Just doing what needed doing." He settled his hat back on his head. "Though if you're truly grateful, perhaps you might consider having dinner with me tomorrow evening. The hotel serves decent food on Thursdays." The invitation caught her by surprise. "Dinner? Just a meal between new acquaintances," he clarified quickly. "Unless that seems improper for Springerville's new schoolteacher." Naomi thought of the proper dinners she'd attended in Philadelphia, the rigid social conventions that had governed her previous life. Out here in the Arizona territory, those rules seemed distant and somewhat irrelevant. And something about Owen Montgomery intrigued her, perhaps his quiet competence or the contradictions she sensed in him. "I'd be delighted," she found herself saying. 7 o'clock, Owen nodded, touching the brim of his hat. 7 it is. Good day, Miss Keller." As he disappeared down the hallway, Naomi returned to her desk, her heart beating a little faster than normal. In just a few days, her life had transformed completely from the secure but stifling existence she'd known in Philadelphia to this wild new world where outlaws roamed the trails and enigmatic bounty hunters invited schoolteachers to dinner. That evening, as Naomi prepared for bed in her small room at the boarding house, she heard raised voices from the street below. Curious, she moved to the window and peered through the thin curtains. A group of men had gathered outside the sheriff's office across the street, their postures suggesting agitation. In their center stood Owen, his stance relaxed but watchful as always, facing a red-faced man who jabbed a finger repeatedly into his chest. Though she couldn't make out their words, the tension was unmistakable. After a heated exchange, the group dispersed, with several men casting dark looks at Owen as they departed. The sheriff, a gray-haired man Naomi had met briefly upon her arrival, clapped Owen on the shoulder before disappearing back into his office. Owen remained alone on the boardwalk, lighting a cigarette with practiced motions. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up suddenly, catching sight of her at the window. Naomi started to step back, embarrassed at being caught eavesdropping, but instead found herself raising her hand in a small wave. Even from a distance, she could see his smile as he tipped his hat to her before walking away into the growing darkness. Naomi closed the curtains and sat on the edge of her bed, wondering what sort of man she'd agreed to dine with and what sort of trouble followed in his wake. The next morning brought unexpected excitement to Springerville. As Naomi walked to the schoolhouse, she noticed unusual activity around the sheriff's office, men on horseback arriving and departing, townspeople gathered in small groups speaking in hushed tones. When she passed the general store, the owner's wife, Mrs. Hobson, hurried out to intercept her. "Miss Keller, have you heard?" the woman asked, her round face flushed with excitement. "They've spotted the Blackwater Gang not 20 miles from town." Naomi felt a chill despite the warm morning. "Are they coming this way?" Mrs. Hobson nodded vigorously. "Sheriff thinks they might be planning to hit the bank. They've robbed 3 others in the territory already this month." She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "They say that Montgomery fellow brought them down on us. He's been hunting their leader for years." Before Naomi could respond, the school bell began to ring, reminding her of her duties. "I should go," she murmured, her thoughts in turmoil. "The children will be waiting." Throughout the day, Naomi found it difficult to concentrate on lessons. Every unusual sound from outside made her tense, expecting gunfire or commotion. The children were similarly distracted, constantly peering out the windows at the slightest noise. When a horse galloped past the schoolhouse around midday, half the class jumped from their seats. "Children, please," Naomi called, trying to restore order. "The sheriff and his men will handle any trouble. Our job is to continue learning. My pa says the Blackwaters kill everyone when they raid a town, announced a freckle-faced boy named Timothy. Even children. That's not true, Naomi insisted, though she had no way of knowing, and spreading such stories only causes unnecessary fear. Owen Montgomery will protect us, declared Sally Jenkins, the girl with braids who had spoken up the previous day. He's killed more outlaws than anyone in the territory. Naomi rapped her pointer on the desk. That is quite enough. Return to your arithmetic problems immediately. When school finally ended for the day, Naomi found Sheriff Wilson waiting outside. The weathered lawman removed his hat as she approached. Miss Keller, I'd like a word if you don't mind. Of course, Sheriff, she replied, anxiety fluttering in her stomach. Is this about the Blackwater Gang? He nodded grimly. I've been advised to suggest you postpone any travel outside town for the next few days. We have reason to believe they're watching the roads. Naomi thought of her dinner plans with Owen. I wasn't planning to leave town, but thank you for the warning. Are we in immediate danger here? The sheriff's weathered face creased in a reassuring smile. We've doubled our patrols, madam. And he added with a meaningful look, we've got some extra help at the moment. You mean Mr. Montgomery? Naomi guessed. Sheriff Wilson studied her with new interest. You've met Owen, then? He helped me when my wagon broke down outside town, she explained, deliberately omitting the fact that the Blackwater Gang had been pursuing her at the time. Is he working with you officially? The sheriff chuckled. Owen Montgomery doesn't work officially with anyone, Miss Keller, but he's got his reasons for wanting to see the Blackwaters brought to justice. He settled his hat back on his head. Just stay alert and keep the schoolhouse doors locked during sessions. And maybe avoid that dinner at the hotel tonight. Naomi blinked in surprise. How did you know about small town? Sheriff Wilson interrupted with a wink. Nothing stays private for long in Springerville. Good day, Miss Keller. As the sheriff walked away, Naomi wondered how to get word to Owen about canceling their dinner plans. She needn't have worried. As she approached the boarding house, she found him waiting on the porch, deep in conversation with her landlady, Mrs. Peterson. Ah, here she is now, Mrs. Peterson announced, smiling at Naomi. I'll leave you two to talk. The older woman disappeared inside, though Naomi noticed she lingered near the window, obviously hoping to overhear their conversation. Mr. Montgomery, Naomi greeted him, setting down her books and papers. I just spoke with the sheriff. Owen's expression was serious. Then you know why I've come. Our dinner will have to wait for a more peaceful time. The Blackwaters, Naomi said quietly, stepping closer. They're here because of you, aren't they? A muscle tightened in his jaw. They're here because of what they are, thieves and murderers who think they're untouchable. His eyes softened as they met hers. But yes, I may have accelerated their timetable by showing up in the area. Are these the same men who chased me on the trail? Naomi asked. Owen nodded. A portion of their gang, at least. Their leader, Victor Blackwater, wasn't with them that day. His hand unconsciously moved to touch the gun at his hip. He rarely does the dirty work himself anymore. Why are you hunting them? Naomi asked, sensing there was more to the story than professional duty. A shadow crossed Owen's face. That's a conversation for another time. He glanced toward the street, his vigilance never wavering. I came to warn you to stay indoors as much as possible for the next few days. The boarding house is solid brick walls, good locks. You'll be safer here than at the schoolhouse. I can't just cancel classes, Naomi protested. These children need consistency, especially during frightening times. Owen looked like he wanted to argue, but instead shook his head with a rueful smile. You're stubborn, Miss Keller. I prefer determined, she corrected him, smiling back despite the tension. Will you be staying in town? For now. His gaze drifted toward the hills surrounding Springerville. Victor will make his move soon. He's not one for patience. Naomi found herself reaching out impulsively to touch his arm. "Be careful, Mr. Montgomery." Owen looked down at her hand, then back to her face with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Owen," he said quietly, "if we're going to be friends in the midst of all this, you might as well use my given name." "Owen," she repeated, the informality feeling both improper and right simultaneously. "And I'm Naomi." "Naomi," he echoed, the name sounding different in his low voice. He stepped back, breaking the moment of connection. "Lock your doors tonight, and maybe keep that little derringer handy just in case." With a final nod, he descended the porch steps and crossed the street, disappearing into the growing shadows of evening. Naomi watched him go, a complex mixture of fear and something warmer stirring within her. That night, sleep eluded Naomi. She lay awake listening to every sound, the creak of the boarding house settling, the occasional hoofbeats of patrol riders passing by, the distant yipping of coyotes in the hills. Her derringer rested on the nightstand beside her bed, a small comfort against the threat that seemed to hover over Springerville. Around midnight, the sound of urgent knocking from downstairs startled her, fully awake. Voices murmured, footsteps hurried up the stairs, and then her own door rattled with a firm knock. "Miss Keller," Mrs. Peterson called through the door, "you need to come quickly. There's trouble at the schoolhouse." Naomi threw on a shawl over her nightdress and opened the door to find her landlady's anxious face. "What's happened?" "Fire," the woman replied tersely. "They're saying it was deliberately set. Sheriffs called for everyone to help form a bucket line." Heart racing, Naomi dressed hastily in the dark and followed Mrs. Peterson downstairs. Outside, the night sky glowed orange in the direction of the schoolhouse. The acrid smell of smoke hung in the air, and shouts echoed through the usually quiet streets. "I have to help," Naomi insisted, already moving toward the commotion. "It's not safe," Mrs. Peterson warned, but Naomi was already hurrying down the street, drawn to the disaster that threatened to destroy her new beginning in Springerville. The scene that greeted her was chaos. Townspeople formed a line from the water pump to the schoolhouse, passing buckets hand to hand while flames leapt from the windows of the small building. Sheriff Wilson directed the firefighting efforts, his face streaked with soot as he shouted orders. Naomi pushed her way through the crowd, grief and anger competing for dominance in her heart. All her teaching materials, the books she'd brought from Philadelphia, the students' work, all of it would be lost. "Miss Keller," a hand caught her arm as she tried to join the bucket line. Owen pulled her aside, his expression grim in the firelight. "You shouldn't be here." "That's my schoolhouse," she protested, trying to pull away. "It's a diversion," he said in a low, urgent voice. "The bank is on the other side of town, virtually unguarded right now," understanding dawned. "The Blackwaters," Owen nodded tersely. "I need to get over there, but I didn't want to leave until I knew you were safe." His eyes scanned the crowd. Something's not right. Victor wouldn't waste time on a schoolhouse when there's money to be had. A gunshot rang out from the direction of the general store, followed by shouting and more gunfire. The crowd around the schoolhouse turned in confusion, the bucket line faltering. "They're hitting the general store too," Owen realized. "They're splitting the town's attention in 3 directions." He gripped Naomi's shoulders. "Get back to the boarding house and stay there. Bolt the door and don't open it for anyone you don't know." Before she could respond, Owen had drawn his pistol and was running toward the new commotion, shouting for several men to follow him. Naomi stood frozen for a moment, the heat of the burning schoolhouse warm against her face, indecision paralyzing her. Another series of shots from yet another direction, the livery stable confirmed Owen's assessment. This was a coordinated attack on Springerville, designed to overwhelm the town's meager defenses by striking multiple targets simultaneously. Naomi turned to run back to the boarding house as instructed, but stopped short when she saw a small figure darting between buildings toward the burning schoolhouse. "Sally," she called, recognizing the girl with braids from her class. "Sally Jenkins, stop." The girl turned, her face illuminated by the firelight. "Miss Keller, my reading prize is inside. I have to get it." Before Naomi could stop her, Sally darted toward the side door of the schoolhouse, the one that led directly to the cloakroom. Without hesitation, Naomi hiked up her skirts and ran after the child, ignoring the shouts of warning from the townspeople still fighting the blaze at the front of the building. The side door stood partially open, smoke billowing out into the night air. Naomi covered her mouth with her shawl and plunged inside, the heat immediately assaulting her. "Sally," she called, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. The cloakroom was relatively untouched by flames, but smoke made visibility poor. Naomi dropped to her knees, remembering that air would be clearer near the floor. "Sally Jenkins, answer me." "Here, Miss Keller," came a frightened voice from the direction of the classroom. "I can't find my way back." Keeping low, Naomi crawled toward the inner door that connected to the main room. The heat intensified as she approached the classroom beyond, was fully engulfed, flames dancing along the wooden desks and licking up the walls to the ceiling. "Stay where you are," Naomi called. "I'm coming to you." Taking a deep breath of the relatively clearer air near the floor, Naomi pushed through the door into an inferno. The familiar classroom was transformed into a hellscape of fire and smoke. Through watering eyes, she made out Sally's small form huddled beneath her desk near the windows, clutching a book to her chest. Naomi crawled forward, ignoring the searing heat that blistered her skin and the embers that landed on her clothing. When she reached the girl, she pulled her close. "We need to go back the way I came in," she shouted over the roar of the flames. "Stay low and follow me." Together they began making their way back toward the cloakroom door, but a thunderous crash stopped them in their tracks. A section of the burning ceiling had collapsed, blocking their escape route with flaming debris. "The windows," Naomi decided, changing direction. "We need to break a window." They crawled toward the nearest one, but the intense heat had warped the frame, sealing it shut. Naomi looked around desperately for something to break the glass, her lungs burning with each breath. Suddenly, the window shattered inward as something heavy struck it from outside. A familiar voice called through the opening. "Naomi, get out now." Owen's face appeared through the smoke, his arm reaching through the broken window. "Give me the girl first." Naomi lifted Sally toward the window, and Owen's strong arms pulled the child to safety. Then he reached back in. "Your turn. Hurry, the roof's about to go." As if to emphasize his words, another section of ceiling collapsed behind them with a shower of sparks. Naomi grasped Owen's hands and felt herself being bodily pulled through the window opening, glass shards tearing at her dress and scratching her skin. The cool night air hit her like a blessing as Owen dragged her away from the burning building, Sally clutching his leg fearfully. They had barely reached a safe distance when the remainder of the roof collapsed with a deafening roar, sending a column of sparks shooting into the night sky. Naomi collapsed onto the ground, coughing violently as her lungs tried to expel the smoke she'd inhaled. Owen knelt beside her, his face black with soot, his eyes wild with a mixture of anger and relief. "What were you thinking?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. "You could have been killed." "Sally," Naomi managed between coughs, looking at the frightened child who still clutched her precious book. "Had to save her." Owen's expression softened marginally. You're either the bravest or the most foolish woman I've ever met. He turned to Sally. You need to find your parents. They'll be worried sick. As the girl ran toward the crowd still fighting the fire at the front of the building, Owen helped Naomi to her feet. Can you walk? We need to get you away from here. Naomi nodded, leaning heavily on his arm. The bank, the general store. My men are handling it, Owen replied grimly. This was just the opening move. Victor's testing our defenses. He looked down at her ash-covered face. I need to get you somewhere safe before I join them. As they moved slowly away from the burning schoolhouse, gunfire continued to echo from different parts of town. The night that had begun with one disaster was quickly spiraling into a full-scale battle for Springerville. The boarding house, Naomi suggested weakly, her throat raw from smoke. Owen shook his head. Too obvious. They know you're the new schoolteacher. They might come looking for you there. He steered her toward a small building set back from the main street. My room at the hotel has a back exit. We'll get you cleaned up and hidden there. Too exhausted to argue, Naomi allowed him to guide her through side streets away from the commotion. The hotel was eerily quiet, its usual occupants having joined the firefighting efforts or barricaded themselves in their rooms. Owen's room was spare but neat: a single bed, a washstand, a trunk at the foot of the bed, and a small table with a lamp, which he lit after locking the door behind them. His saddlebags lay open on the table, revealing glimpses of ammunition, wanted posters, and other tools of his trade. Sit, he instructed, guiding her to the edge of the bed. He poured water from a pitcher into the basin and brought it to her with a clean cloth. Clean your face while I check for burns. Naomi dabbed at her face and hands, the water in the basin quickly turning black with soot. Owen knelt before her, gently examining her arms where embers had burned small holes in her sleeves. You're lucky, he pronounced after a thorough inspection. Some minor burns and scratches, but nothing serious. His hands lingered on her wrists, his touch unexpectedly gentle for a man who made his living hunting outlaws. What possessed you to run into a burning building? I couldn't let Sally die, Naomi replied simply. She's my student, my responsibility. Owen shook his head in wonder. You're something else, Naomi Keller. He rose and moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtains. The fire's dying down, but they're still shooting by the livery. Is this all because of you? Naomi asked quietly. Mrs. Hobson said the Blackwaters came because you were hunting them. Owen's shoulders stiffened. It's more complicated than that. He turned to face her, his expression haunted in the lamplight. Victor Blackwater and I have history, old scores that need settling. What kind of history? For a long moment, Owen was silent, weighing his words. Finally, he sat beside her on the bed, close enough that she could smell the gunpowder and smoke that clung to his clothing. 10 years ago, I was a Texas Ranger, he began, his voice low. My brother Nathan rode with me. We were tracking the Blackwaters after they robbed a bank in El Paso. We caught up to them near the New Mexico border. His hands clenched into fists at the memory. It was an ambush. Nathan died in my arms while Victor Blackwater watched and laughed. Naomi instinctively reached for his hand, her fingers closing around his whitened knuckles. I'm so sorry. I've been hunting him ever since, Owen continued, his voice flat. Left the Rangers, became a bounty hunter, tracked the Blackwaters from Texas to Arizona. I've managed to capture or kill most of the original gang, but Victor always slips away. He looked at her directly. Until now. I've got him cornered in Springerville, and he knows it. Is that worth burning down a town? Naomi asked, trying to understand the scale of his vendetta. Owen's expression darkened. You don't know what they've done, the people they've killed, the lives they've destroyed. His voice dropped even lower. The schoolhouse fire tonight, That's mild compared to what they did in Tucson last year. An entire family, parents and 3 children, burned alive in their home because the father witnessed a Blackwater robbery. Naomi shuddered at the image his words conjured. So tonight is personal for both of you. Yes, Owen admitted, but I need to end this before more innocent people get hurt. He stood abruptly, checking his pistol and retrieving a rifle from beside the bed. I should join the others. You'll be safe here. The door locks from inside, and no one knows you're here. As he moved toward the door, Naomi rose and caught his arm. Be careful, Owen. Revenge can blind a person to danger. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then met her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. It's not just about revenge anymore, he said softly. Now I have something else to fight for. Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her, a brief, fierce press of his lips against hers that ended almost before she registered it had begun. Then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him, leaving Naomi standing alone in his room with the lingering warmth of his kiss and the distant sounds of conflict outside. The night seemed endless as Naomi waited in Owen's room, listening to the sporadic gunfire and shouting from different parts of town. She dozed fitfully on the edge of the bed, startling awake at every loud noise, wondering if each shot might be the one that found its mark in Owen's heart. By dawn, an uneasy quiet had settled over Springerville. Naomi peered cautiously through the curtains to see townspeople emerging onto the streets, assessing damage and gathering in small groups to share information. The smell of smoke still hung in the air, a reminder of the night's violence. When a soft knock came at the door, Naomi froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the derringer in her pocket. Naomi, it's me. Owen's voice, though muffled by the door, brought immediate relief. She unlocked the door to find him leaning heavily against the door frame, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. A bloodied bandage was wrapped around his upper arm, and a fresh cut marred his cheekbone. But he was alive. You're hurt, she said, pulling him gently inside and relocking the door. It's nothing, he dismissed, though he winced as he lowered himself into the room's only chair. Bullet grazed me. Doc already patched it up. What happened? Naomi asked, pouring fresh water into the basin and gathering clean cloths. Is it over? Owen closed his eyes briefly. Not over. But we drove them back. They hit the bank, got away with some cash but not the main safe. Burned down your schoolhouse and part of the livery as distractions. He opened his eyes to watch her as she approached with the damp cloth. 2 townspeople dead. 1 of my men wounded badly. 3 of the Blackwater Gang won't be causing any more trouble. Naomi gently cleaned the cut on his face, trying not to notice how he leaned almost imperceptibly into her touch. And Victor Blackwater escaped, Owen admitted, frustration evident in his voice. But not far. They're holed up in an abandoned mining camp about 5 miles north of town. He caught her wrist as she withdrew the cloth. We're mounting a posse at noon, going to finish this once and for all. Fear clutched at Naomi's heart. That sounds like a suicide mission. It might be, he acknowledged grimly, but it's our best chance. They're wounded, low on supplies. If we wait, they'll either slip away or get reinforcements. And you have to go, Naomi said, understanding that nothing she could say would dissuade him. Owen's eyes softened as they studied her face. I'm sorry about the schoolhouse. The town council's already talking about rebuilding. They want to use the church for classes in the meantime. Naomi smiled despite the worry gnawing at her. Buildings can be replaced. Last night, Owen began hesitantly, before I left. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize, Naomi interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. Not for that. A flicker of something, hope perhaps, or wonder crossed his face. Naomi. He started, then seemed at a loss for words, The tension between them was interrupted by urgent knocking at the door. "Montgomery, you in there?" Sheriff Wilson's voice called. "We've got a situation." Owen rose, grimacing at the pain in his injured arm. When he opened the door, the sheriff's eyebrows rose at the sight of Naomi, but he made no comment on her presence. "Ryder just came in from the North Trail," Wilson reported. "Says the Blackwaters have taken hostage his family of settlers they caught on the road. They're offering a trade." "What kind of trade?" Owen asked, though the grimness of his expression suggested he already knew. "You," the sheriff replied bluntly. "They'll release the hostages if you come alone. Otherwise, they start killing them one by one, starting with the children." Naomi's hand flew to her mouth in horror, but Owen's face hardened into resolved determination. "When and where?" "Noon. Eagle Canyon." Sheriff Wilson glanced at Naomi, then back to Owen. "It's a trap, son, you know that." "Of course it is," Owen agreed calmly. "But those people will die if I don't go." He checked his watch. "That gives us 3 hours to come up with a plan that doesn't end with all of us dead." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Meeting at my office in 30 minutes, don't be late." With a respectful nod to Naomi, he departed, leaving them alone again. Owen began gathering his weapons without looking at her. "You should go back to the boarding house," he said, his voice deliberately neutral. "People will be worried about you." "You can't seriously be considering this," Naomi protested. "They'll kill you the moment you show your face." "Probably," he agreed, checking the ammunition in his revolver. "But I might be able to buy enough time for the sheriff and his men to get those hostages out." Naomi stepped in front of him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "There has to be another way." Owen's face softened momentarily. "Sometimes there isn't." He holstered his weapon and gently moved her aside. "I need to clean up before the meeting." Understanding that further argument was futile, Naomi moved toward the door. "Will I see you before you leave?" Owen hesitated, then nodded once. "I'll find you." As Naomi walked back to the boarding house through the smoke-damaged streets of Springerville, she felt a growing determination take root alongside her fear. In the months since her husband's death, she had remade herself from grieving widow to independent woman, crossing half a continent to build a new life. She had survived the journey, faced down outlaws, and run into a burning building to save a child. She was not about to stand idly by while a man she was growing to care for rode willingly into a death trap. By the time she reached the boarding house, a plan was forming in her mind, a dangerous, possibly foolish plan, but one that might save lives, including Owen Montgomery's. Mrs. Peterson fussed over Naomi's smoky appearance and minor injuries, clucking like a mother hen as she insisted on brewing tea and sending for the doctor. "I'm fine, truly," Naomi assured her while accepting the steaming cup gratefully. "But I do need to ask you something. Do you know where I might find Sally Jenkins? I need to speak with her urgently." The landlady looked surprised but directed Naomi to a small house near the general store where the Jenkins family lived. "Her father's the blacksmith," Mrs. Peterson added. "Good man, though the wife's a bit sharp-tongued." Naomi finished her tea quickly, washed her face, and changed into her one remaining clean dress before heading to the blacksmith's home. Her mind raced with details of her plan, mentally cataloging what she would need and who might help her. The Jenkins household was in a state of controlled chaos when Naomi arrived. Mrs. Jenkins was hanging laundry in the yard while Mr. Jenkins repaired a damaged window, likely broken during the previous night's attack. Sally sat on the porch steps, still clutching the book she had risked her life to save from the burning schoolhouse. "Miss Keller," the girl cried, jumping to her feet when she spotted her teacher. "Mama, it's Miss Keller who saved me from the fire, Mrs." Jenkins turned, her weathered face softening at the sight of Naomi. "Miss Keller, We owe you a debt we can never repay. Our Sally means everything to us." "I only did what anyone would do," Naomi demurred. "Actually, I've come to ask Sally for help with something important." She lowered her voice. "Something that might help save more lives." Mr. Jenkins approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Anything you need, Miss Keller. Just name it." Naomi looked at the earnest faces of the family who owed her nothing yet were willing to offer anything. In Philadelphia, she had been surrounded by society's finest, yet rarely had she encountered such genuine goodness. "I need to know everything Sally can tell me about Eagle Canyon," Naomi explained. "And I'll need supplies from your forge, Mr. Jenkins." "It's rather unusual, but I promise it's for a good cause." As Naomi outlined her plan, the Jenkins family's expressions shifted from confusion to concern to reluctant admiration. By the time she finished, all three were nodding in agreement. "It's risky," Mr. Jenkins acknowledged, scratching his beard thoughtfully. "But it might work, and Montgomery's a good man for all his dangerous ways, worth saving." "I'll show you the back trail to Eagle Canyon," Sally offered eagerly. "Papa takes me hunting there sometimes." "There's a high ridge where you can see the whole canyon floor without being spotted. And I'll provide the tools you need," Mr. Jenkins added, "though I hope to God you won't have to use them." As they gathered the necessary supplies, Naomi felt a curious calm settle over her. Fear still lurked beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by determination and a growing certainty that she was where she needed to be, doing what needed to be done. While Mr. Jenkins worked in his forge, Sally spread a crude map on the kitchen table, drawing with charcoal to show Naomi the layout of Eagle Canyon, the main trail, the hidden approach from the ridge, the spots where a person might hide or find cover. "This is where they'll probably hold the meeting," Sally said, pointing to a wider section of the canyon floor. "There's water there, and it's open enough that Mr. Montgomery won't be able to hide, but the Blackwaters can position men all around on the higher ground." Naomi studied the map intently, memorizing every detail. "And this ridge, how difficult is it to reach?" "Not too bad if you know the way," Sally assured her. "Steep in parts, but there's a trail that mountain goats use. I can climb it easy. You might find it harder in a dress, though." Mrs. Jenkins, who had been listening silently, disappeared into another room and returned with a bundle of cloth. "My son's old clothes," she explained, holding up worn trousers and a loose shirt. "They might fit you well enough for climbing." Naomi accepted the clothing gratefully, touched by the woman's practical kindness. "I don't know how to thank you all. Just come back safe," Mrs. Jenkins said firmly. "Both of you. This town needs its schoolteacher." She paused, a knowing look in her eyes. "And it seems to me that schoolteacher might need her bounty hunter too." Naomi felt her cheeks warm but didn't deny the implication. Instead, she asked, "Can you recommend a horse I might borrow? I'll need to leave town unnoticed." Mr. Jenkins nodded. "My mare's steady and knows the canyon trails. She'll carry you safely." He glanced at the clock on the mantel. "You should change and get moving if you want to be in position before noon. I'll have everything ready when you're done." 30 minutes later, Naomi emerged from the Jenkins home dressed in boy's clothes, her hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. The tools from Mr. Jenkins secured in a saddlebag along with food, water, and a small medical kit Mrs. Jenkins had insisted she take. The disguise wouldn't fool anyone looking closely, but it might prevent casual observers from recognizing Springerville's new schoolteacher riding out of town alone. Mr. Jenkins led a dappled gray mare from the small stable behind their house. "This is Pepper. She's sure-footed and calm under pressure. Treats in your right saddlebag if she needs convincing. Remember what I told you about the trail," Sally added urgently. Stay to the left where it forks near the big boulder. The right path leads to a dead end. Naomi mounted the horse, adjusting to the unfamiliar sensation of riding astride rather than side saddle. I'll remember. Thank you all. As she prepared to leave, Mrs. Jenkins stepped forward and pressed something into her hand, a small revolver, heavier and more substantial than Naomi's Derringer. My husband's spare, the woman explained quietly. 6 shots instead of 2. God willing, you won't need it, but better to have it, Naomi finished, tucking the weapon into her waistband beneath the loose shirt. I'll return it safely. With final waves to the Jenkins family, Naomi urged Pepper forward, taking a back alley that led toward the northern edge of town. As she passed near the sheriff's office, she caught a glimpse of men gathering the posse preparing to follow Owen at a distance, ready to intervene when the inevitable trap was sprung. She kept her head down, the wide hat shadowing her face, and continued without being challenged. Once clear of the town's outskirts, Naomi let Pepper pick up speed, following the directions Sally had given her to find the hidden trail that would lead to the ridge overlooking Eagle Canyon. The main road would take Owen and the Blackwaters directly into the canyon's heart, but this lesser-known path wound through scrubby pine forest before climbing to the rocky heights that formed the canyon's eastern wall. The sun climbed higher as she rode, the heat of the day intensifying. Naomi's thoughts turned to Owen. Was he preparing for what might be his final confrontation? Did he truly believe there was no other way? And what of the kiss they had shared, a gesture born of desperation, or something more meaningful? She had known him less than a week, yet somehow Owen Montgomery had worked his way into her heart with his quiet competence, his unwavering sense of justice, and the gentleness that occasionally broke through his hardened exterior. The thought of losing him now, just as something was beginning between them, was unbearable. Faster, Pepper, she murmured, spurring the mare to greater speed. We have a life to save. The trail grew steeper and more challenging as it wound upward through increasingly rocky terrain. Naomi dismounted to lead Pepper through particularly difficult sections. Grateful for the sturdy boots Mrs. Jenkins had provided along with the boys' clothing. By the time she reached the ridge Sally had described, the sun was directly overhead noon. From her elevated position, Naomi could see the entire canyon spread below her like a painting. The main trail wound along the canyon floor, following a small stream that glinted in the sunlight. Near the center, where the canyon widened, she could make out a group of people, some on horseback, others huddled together on foot. The hostages and their captors, waiting for Owen Montgomery to deliver himself into their hands. Naomi secured Pepper to a stunted pine tree and moved carefully to the edge of the ridge, staying low to avoid being spotted from below. The saddlebags containing Mr. Jenkins' tools hung heavy over her shoulder as she crawled behind a large boulder that provided both cover and a clear view of the scene below. Through the rising heat waves, she could make out details: now 5 riders wearing the dust-covered clothes of settlers, their hands bound, surrounded by armed men. 2 smaller figures, children, stood close to a man whose confident posture and fine clothes marked him as someone of authority. Victor Blackwater, she presumed. Movement at the canyon's entrance caught her attention. A lone rider approached slowly, the sun glinting off his rifle barrel. Even from this distance, Naomi recognized Owen's straight-backed posture and the distinctive chestnut stallion he rode. The game was beginning. Naomi reached into the saddlebag and withdrew Mr. Jenkins' creation, a modified flare gun, loaded with a special charge the blacksmith had assured her would create an impressive distraction when fired. Alongside it, she placed the revolver Mrs. Jenkins had provided, hoping she wouldn't need to use either weapon but determined to be prepared. Now, all she could do was wait for the right moment and pray that her desperate plan might somehow turn the tide in Owen's favor. Owen Montgomery rode into Eagle Canyon with the calm acceptance of a man who had made peace with his likely fate. The canyon walls rose on either side like the jaws of a trap ready to snap shut, and he had no illusions about Victor Blackwater's intentions. The hostages were merely bait. What Victor truly wanted was to watch Owen die slowly, painfully, in retribution for the decade-long pursuit that had decimated his gang. As he approached the widening at the canyon's center, Owen counted 7 armed men visible on the canyon floor, with undoubtedly more hidden among the rocks above. The hostage family parents, an adolescent boy and 2 younger children, stood clustered near Victor, their faces showing the fear and exhaustion of their ordeal. Victor Blackwater stepped forward as Owen drew near, a smile spreading across his handsome face. Unlike his rough-hewn followers, Victor affected the appearance of a gentleman, well-tailored clothing, neatly trimmed beard, and the polished manners that had helped him charm his way into society circles where he gathered intelligence for his robberies. "Montgomery," Victor called, spreading his arms in mock welcome. "Punctual as always. I've always appreciated that about you." Owen reined in his horse about 30 yards from the group, close enough for conversation but maintaining what little tactical advantage distance provided. "Let the family go, Blackwater. Your quarrels with me." Victor laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. "So noble, so predictable." He placed a hand on the shoulder of the youngest hostage, a girl of perhaps 7 years. "Dismount and drop your weapons first. Then we can discuss the terms of their release." Owen's gaze swept the canyon again, noting positions, calculating odds. The sheriff and his posse would be following at a distance, but they wouldn't risk moving in while the hostages were in immediate danger. He needed to buy time, create an opportunity. "I want to see them walk away first," Owen countered, remaining mounted. "Send them down the trail. Once they're clear, I'll surrender my weapons." "You're hardly in a position to negotiate," Victor observed coolly. "But very well, a small gesture of good faith." He nodded to one of his men, who roughly cut the bonds on the mother's wrists. "Mrs. Allen can start walking. The rest stay until you're disarmed." The woman looked desperately at her husband and children, clearly torn between running for help and staying with her family. "Go," her husband urged. "Get help." With a last anguished look, Mrs. Allen began walking shakily toward the canyon entrance, passing Owen without meeting his eyes. One hostage freed a small victory, but not enough to change the fundamental equation. "Your turn," Victor called. "Weapons on the ground, Montgomery." Owen slowly dismounted, his mind racing for alternatives even as his body complied with the inevitable. He unbuckled his gun belt and let it fall, then removed the rifle from its scabbard and placed it on the ground. The knife in his boot and the derringer in his vest pocket remained hidden, not enough to fight his way out, but perhaps enough to take Victor with him when the end came. "Now kick them away and walk forward," Victor instructed, clearly enjoying the moment of triumph. Owen pushed the weapons aside with his boot and took several steps forward, hands raised slightly. "The rest of the family goes free now," he insisted. "In due time," Victor replied smoothly. He gestured to his men, who moved to surround Owen. "We have unfinished business first, you and I. 10 years of business." 10 years of justice catching up to you," Owen corrected, his voice steady despite the guns now pointed at him from all directions. "How many people have died by your orders, Victor? How many lives destroyed?" Victor's expression hardened. "Spare me the sermon. You killed my brother in Lerdo, my cousin in Tucson, half my original gang dead or in prison because of you." He drew a handsome silver-plated revolver from his holster. "Did you really think this would end any other way?" "I always figured one of us would die by the other's hand," Owen acknowledged calmly. "Just didn't expect you'd need a dozen men and hostages to work up the courage to face me." The insult hit its mark. Victor's face flushed with anger. "I don't need anyone's help to kill you, Montgomery. I've just been saving the pleasure." "Prove it," Owen challenged, taking another step forward. "Send your men away. Face me one-on-one, or are you afraid?" For a moment the gambit seemed to work. Victor's pride warred visibly with his caution. Then his eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You'd like that, wouldn't you? Create a distraction, give the sheriff's men time to move in." He shook his head. "No, I think we'll do this my way." He raised his revolver, aiming it at Owen's chest. "Any last words for the man who's hunted you across 3 territories?" Owen tensed, preparing for his final, desperate move, but before he could act, the canyon erupted in chaos. A blinding flash and deafening boom came from the eastern ridge, followed by a shower of sparks that rained down on the gathered outlaws. Men yelled in confusion, horses reared in panic, and for a crucial moment, everyone's attention shifted toward the unexpected explosion. Owen didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, tackling Victor to the ground as gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The hostage father seized the opportunity, grabbing his children and pulling them toward the cover of nearby rocks. Owen and Victor grappled in the dirt, each fighting for control of Victor's silver revolver. Around them, the canyon had transformed into a battlefield as the sheriff's posse, recognizing the diversion, charged in from the canyon entrance. "You're dead, Montgomery," Victor snarled, his gentleman's facade completely gone as they rolled across the ground. "Even if you take me, my men will cut you down." "Your men are a little busy," Owen grunted, slamming Victor's gun hand against a rock until the weapon fell free. He delivered a powerful blow to Victor's jaw, momentarily stunning him. Owen scrambled for the fallen revolver, but Victor recovered quickly, kicking it away and drawing a hidden knife from his boot. The blade slashed across Owen's forearm as he raised it defensively, opening a fresh wound alongside his previous injury. Ignoring the pain, Owen blocked Victor's next strike and delivered a punishing blow to his ribs. They were evenly matched, both experienced fighters, both fueled by years of hatred and determination. A stray bullet kicked up dust inches from Owen's head, reminding him of the larger battle raging around them. The sheriff's men were exchanging fire with the Blackwater Gang, using the canyon walls for cover. The hostages were nowhere in sight, hopefully safely hidden or escaped. Victor took advantage of Owen's momentary distraction, landing a savage kick to his injured arm. Pain exploded through Owen's body, but he channeled it into renewed fury, tackling Victor again and driving him backward into a boulder. "This ends today," Owen growled, pinning Victor against the rock with his forearm pressed against the outlaw's throat. "One way or another." Victor's eyes bulged as he struggled for air, but he managed a defiant smile. "Look. Up." He wheezed. Instinct made Owen glance upward just in time to see one of Victor's men taking aim from a ledge directly above. Before he could move, a shot rang out, but it wasn't Owen who fell. The outlaw on the ledge toppled forward, falling to the canyon floor with a sickening impact. Victor used the distraction to break free, diving for his discarded revolver. He came up firing, the bullet grazing Owen's side. Owen rolled behind a boulder, drawing the hidden derringer from his vest pocket. The shooting around them had diminished, suggesting the battle was reaching its conclusion. Voice called out the sheriff's men securing prisoners, checking for wounded. But Victor Blackwater remained at large, the silver revolver in his hand gleaming in the sunlight as he stalked toward Owen's position. "Come out, Montgomery," Victor called. "Let's finish this like men." Owen checked his daring 2 shots, not enough to guarantee success against a desperate man. But he'd come too far to back down now. Taking a deep breath, he prepared to step out from cover for the final confrontation. Before he could move, another shot echoed through the canyon. Victor staggered, dropping to one knee as blood blossomed on his shoulder. His revolver fell from suddenly nerveless fingers. Owen emerged cautiously from behind the boulder to see Victor staring in disbelief at his wounded shoulder. Beyond him, descending carefully from the eastern ridge, was a figure Owen recognized despite the boy's clothing and wide-brimmed hat. "Naomi," he breathed, astonishment and relief washing over him in equal measure. Victor lunged for his fallen weapon with his good arm, but Owen was faster. A swift kick sent the silver revolver skittering away across the rocky ground. "It's over, Victor," Owen said, his derringer now pointed steadily at the outlaw's heart. "The Blackwater Gang ends today." Sheriff Wilson approached, revolver drawn. "Montgomery, you all right?" "I'm still breathing," Owen confirmed, not taking his eyes off Victor. "The hostages?" "Safe," the sheriff reported. "Mrs. Allen met us on the trail. The rest are shaken up but unharmed." He glanced toward Naomi, who had reached the canyon floor and was approaching cautiously. "Seems you had help we didn't know about." Owen finally allowed himself to look fully at Naomi, taking in her determined expression, the revolver still clutched in her hand, and the unmistakable relief in her eyes as they met his. "Yes," he agreed softly. "I certainly did." As the sheriff took custody of Victor Blackwater, reading him a list of charges that would ensure he spent the rest of his life behind bars if he didn't hang first, Owen crossed to where Naomi stood. Her borrowed clothes were dusty from the climb, and a small cut on her cheek suggested she hadn't made the descent unscathed, but she had never looked more beautiful to him. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever witnessed," he told her, echoing his words from the night before. "Probably both." Naomi smiled, the tension of the confrontation finally easing from her shoulders. "I could say the same about your plan to surrender yourself." Owen glanced at the revolver she still held. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My father taught me," she replied, finally lowering the weapon. "He believed every woman should know how to defend herself." She looked past him to where the sheriff's men were binding Victor's wound before securing him for transport. "I aimed for his shoulder. I didn't want to kill him." "More mercy than he deserved," Owen remarked, though there was no bitterness in his tone. The need for vengeance that had driven him for a decade had finally been satisfied not with Victor's death, but with his defeat and capture. Justice would be served through the courts now. "Are you badly hurt?" Naomi asked, her eyes moving to the blood staining his sleeve and the fresh wound on his side. "Nothing that won't heal," he assured her. He reached out tentatively, brushing a strand of hair that had escaped from beneath her hat. "Why did you do it, Naomi? Why risk your life like that?" Her eyes met his directly, unwavering. "For the same reason you were willing to sacrifice yourself for those hostages, because it was the right thing to do." She paused, then added more softly, "And because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you before we had a chance to discover what this might be between us." Owen's hand moved to cup her cheek gently. "And what do you think this might be?" "Something worth fighting for," she replied simply. "Something worth building a life around, perhaps." Around them, the aftermath of battle continued, wounded being tended, prisoners secured, the hostage family reunited in tearful embraces. But for Owen and Naomi, the world had narrowed to just the two of them, standing amid the dust and chaos of Eagle Canyon. I've been chasing ghosts for 10 years, Owen said quietly. Never staying in one place, never allowing myself to form attachments. I'm not sure I remember how to live any other way. Then perhaps it's time to learn, Naomi suggested, her hand coming up to cover his where it rested against her cheek. Springerville needs rebuilding after last night. They'll need a new schoolhouse. And I hear the sheriff might be looking for a deputy with experience. Owen smiled, the weight of a decade of pursuit finally lifting from his shoulders. Are you proposing I settle down, Miss Keller? I'm proposing you consider it, Mr. Montgomery, she returned with matching lightness, though her eyes held the seriousness of her suggestion. After all, a schoolteacher needs someone to fix her wagon when it breaks down on the trail. Preferably someone who can work quickly while keeping watch for trouble. Owen laughed, a free and genuine sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Then, mindless of the audience of lawmen and captured outlaws, he pulled Naomi into his arms and kissed her properly, not the desperate, fleeting kiss of the previous night, but a promise of all that might come. I believe that can be arranged, he murmured when they finally parted, both breathless and smiling. Though I hope your next wagon wheel lasts a good long while. If not, she replied with newfound boldness, I know just the man to fix it. 6 months later, Springerville had largely recovered from the Blackwater Gang's attack. The newly rebuilt schoolhouse stood proudly at the edge of town, larger and sturdier than its predecessor. Inside, Naomi Keller Montgomery wrote arithmetic problems on the blackboard, while 28 students bent diligently over their slates. The gold band on her left hand caught the afternoon sunlight as she moved between the rows of desks, offering guidance and encouragement. The wedding had been small but joyous, held in the town church 2 months after the events in Eagle Canyon. Sheriff Wilson had given the bride away, and the entire town had turned out to celebrate the union of their schoolteacher and their new deputy sheriff. Victor Blackwater and the surviving members of his gang had been transported to Yuma Territorial Prison, where they would remain for the rest of their natural lives. The reward money for their capture had been divided between the sheriff's office and Owen, who had used his share to purchase a small ranch just outside town close enough for both of them to ride in daily for their respective duties, but far enough away to provide peace and privacy. As Naomi dismissed the class for the day, she noticed Sally Jenkins lingering by her desk, the same precious book clutched to her chest that she had risked her life to save from the fire. Miss Naomi, the girl began, then corrected herself with a smile. I mean, Mrs. Montgomery. I wanted to show you something. Naomi sat beside the child, accepting the book as Sally carefully opened it to a marked page. What am I looking at, Sally? This poem, Sally explained, pointing to verses on the worn page. My mama used to read it to me when I was little. It's about being brave and doing what's right, even when you're afraid. She looked up at Naomi with earnest eyes. Like you did in the canyon. Naomi read the verses, touched by the child's comparison. It's a beautiful poem, Sally. Is this why you ran into the burning schoolhouse to save the book? Sally nodded solemnly. It was my mama's and her mama's before that. I couldn't let it burn up. She hesitated, then added, Deputy Montgomery says sometimes the most important things are worth risking everything for. He's a wise man, my husband, Naomi agreed with a smile. Though I think he might have preferred you didn't test that particular lesson in a burning building. Sally giggled, then gathered her things to leave. At the door, she turned back. Mrs. Montgomery, I'm glad you stayed in Springerville, and I'm glad Deputy Montgomery stayed too. So am I, Sally, Naomi replied softly. So am I. After tidying the classroom, Naomi collected her books and shawl and stepped outside into the crisp autumn afternoon. As had become their custom, Owen waited for her on horseback, his chestnut stallion standing patiently beside the dappled mare that had carried Naomi to Eagle Canyon and had since become her own. "How were the young scholars today?" Owen asked as he helped her mount. "Restless with the cooler weather," Naomi replied, settling comfortably in her saddle. "Mrs. Jenkins tells me Sally is determined to become a teacher herself someday." Owen smiled, the expression coming more easily to him these days. She could have no better example to follow. He glanced toward the distant mountains, where the first dusting of snow was visible on the highest peaks. "Sheriff got a telegram from Yuma this morning. Victor Blackwater's appeal was denied. He'll serve his full sentence." Naomi studied her husband's face, searching for any remnant of the obsession that had driven him for so long. She found only peace and the quiet satisfaction of justice served. "Does it feel strange, having it truly over after all this time?" Owen considered the question as they rode side by side toward their home. "Not strange," he decided finally. "Freeing, like putting down a heavy burden I'd carried so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight." They rode in companionable silence for a while, passing farmers returning from their fields, and a wagon loaded with supplies from the general store. People called greetings to Deputy and Mrs. Montgomery, no longer viewing either of them as outsiders but as integral parts of the community. "I have news," Naomi said as they approached their ranch, the small but sturdy house visible in the distance. "News that might change things for us." Owen glanced at her, curiosity in his eyes. "Good news or bad?" "Good," she assured him with a smile that couldn't quite hide her nervousness. "At least, I hope you'll think so." She took a deep breath. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it this morning. We're going to have a baby, Owen, in the spring." Owen reined his horse to a halt, his expression transforming from surprise to wonder to profound joy in the span of seconds. He was off his mount in one fluid motion, reaching up to help Naomi down from her mare and then pulling her into his arms. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." Naomi nodded, tears of happiness blurring her vision as she read the love and excitement in his face. "Our family," she confirmed. "The beginning of it, anyway." Owen kissed her then, right there on the trail with the setting sun painting the Arizona sky in brilliant oranges and purples. When they parted, he kept his arms around her, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "When I rode into that canyon 6 months ago," he said quietly, "I thought I was riding to my death. I had nothing but vengeance to live for." His hand moved gently to rest against her still flat stomach. "Now I have everything to live for, a wife, a child, a home, a future. And a wagon wheel that might need fixing someday," Naomi added with a smile, leaning into his embrace. Owen laughed, the sound carrying across the open landscape that had become their home. "I'll be ready," he promised, taking her hand to continue their journey home. "Always." As they walked their horses the remaining distance to their ranch, Naomi reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together: a broken wagon wheel, a band of outlaws, and the courage to fight for something worth building a life around. What had begun in danger and desperation had blossomed into love and the promise of a family. Spring arrived in Springerville with a profusion of wildflowers and the birth of Owen and Naomi's son, Nathan James Montgomery, named for Owen's fallen brother and Naomi's father. The boy had his mother's intelligent eyes and his father's determined chin, a combination that promised both thoughtfulness and strength of will as he grew. On a warm Sunday afternoon in May, they gathered with friends on the porch of their ranch house. Sheriff Wilson and his wife, the Jenkins family, Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house, and other townspeople who had become dear to them over the months. Little Nathan slept peacefully in a cradle Owen had crafted by hand, oblivious to the celebration being held in his honor. "To new beginnings," Sheriff Wilson toasted, raising his glass, "and to the finest deputy and schoolteacher Springerville has ever known. And to wagon wheels that break at exactly the right time," Sally Jenkins added with a knowing smile, making the adults laugh. As the afternoon progressed and guests began to depart, Owen and Naomi stood together at the edge of their property, watching the sun begin its descent toward the distant horizon. Their son slept against Naomi's shoulder, one tiny hand curled around his father's finger. "Any regrets?" Owen asked softly, his free arm wrapped around his wife's waist. "About leaving Philadelphia, about choosing this life instead." Naomi looked up at him, at the man who had saved her life on a dusty trail and then proceeded to capture her heart with his quiet strength and unwavering integrity. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." A wagon approached on the main road, its wheel making a distinctive wobbling sound that suggested repairs would soon be needed. Owen grinned as he recognized the familiar cadence of impending mechanical failure. "Sounds like the Petersons' wagon could use some attention," he observed. "Good thing they know a man who can fix it fast." "While keeping watch," Naomi added with a smile, leaning into his embrace as they turned toward home, their son sleeping peacefully between them and their future stretching out before them like the wide Arizona sky, boundless with possibility and bright with promise.